Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. Welcome to the third panel on Reinventing EU Citizenship. So to quickly introduce myself, my name is Claire, and I recently joined ECAS as an EU Rights Manager. Our four speakers on this panel are going to share very interesting insights with us about the future and the evolution of the concept of EU citizenship. Our first speaker is Sybille Luhmann. Sybille is a policy officer at the Directorate-General of Justice of the European Commission. She has a focus on union citizenship rights and free movements. She will shed light on freedom of movements and rights of mobile EU citizens, because we saw more and more confusion regarding their rights during the pandemics about social security, but not only. So today she will be talking about the soon-to-be issued communication on Directive 2004/38. So Sybille, the floor is yours. We cannot hear.
Perhaps now?
Now we can. Thank you.
It only took 2 years of pandemic for me to figure out my IT tools. Well, thanks so much, Claire, for the kind introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to this event and rather challenging panel on the reinvention of EU citizenship. I would like to contribute to the debate by briefly outlining the Commission's ongoing and planned work in the field of EU citizenship. But let me start by acknowledging that alongside peace, EU citizenship is one of the most significant achievements of the European project and is unique in the world. So this very much echoes the keynote speaker's, Mrs. Thum, words on EU citizenship. With the adoption of the 2020 EU Citizenship Report, the Commission has once again reaffirmed its attachment for the strengthening and promotion of the EU citizenship rights. We are a union of free citizens, and our guiding principles in the Citizenship Report are to empower all EU citizens and protect their rights, while safeguarding democratic values and the rule of law as a priority. Having this in mind, we have now embarked on the implementation of our commitments that we outlined in the Citizenship Report. To that end, we established 4 priorities: strengthening the democratic participation of citizens and empowering them, protecting and promoting EU citizenship, facilitating the exercise of free movement and simplifying daily life, and protecting EU citizens in Europe and abroad, including in times of crises. We're also closely following the Conference on the Future of Europe and other innovative new participatory democratic formats. The conference created a new public forum for an open and inclusive, transparent and structured debate with citizens around a number of key priorities and challenges. The future of European democracy depends on making sure citizens participate actively in such debates. We need to encourage democratic participation. This is a question of turnout and democratic legitimacy to sustain and further develop open and inclusive societies. We see it in the classrooms, we see it on the streets. Young Europeans are showing renewed interest in political engagement and making their voices heard and in shaping societies that we live in. This resulted in a record turnout in the last European elections, which has largely been driven by the younger generation, a generation which is also at the forefront of new European social movements on issues such as climate change, economy and taxation, racism and equality. So a very diverse portfolio. As we noted in our 2019 report on the European elections, we want to keep this momentum. So for the 2024 European elections, particular attention will be paid to young and elderly voters, women, mobile European citizens, and people with disabilities. To this end, the Commission proposed new priorities and actions aiming to enhance democratic participation, empowerment, and inclusion. This includes the proposal we made in November last year to update the rules of electoral rights of mobile EU citizens. So this is the first chunk I've been asked to briefly present. This group of citizens has grown steadily in the last 10 years, reaching 13.5 million citizens even after the departure of the United Kingdom. Yet, EU citizens still face obstacles in exercising their rights, as we've seen today, when they vote or stand as candidates in other member states. The changes proposed are to make it easier for mobile EU citizens both to vote and to stand in local and European elections. In this regard, we found that information is key. The Commission proposals will introduce clearer and increased responsibilities for member states to inform mobile EU citizens about their electoral rights. In a direct and individual manner, in clear and plain language, in at least one other official language of the European Union that is broadly understood by the largest possible number of European Union citizens residing in the territory, and made accessible to persons with disabilities and adapted for specific groups such as young voters. So really, we're trying to get the message out to empower as many EU citizens as possible. The updated directives will also impose standardized templates available in all EU languages to simplify registration as a voter or candidate and improve the collection of data for European elections and municipal elections. Here, we are very happy with the close collaboration with the member states in the European Cooperation Network on Elections. We're also reinforcing the mechanism to prevent multiple voting, whereby some people may vote twice in the same European Parliament elections, once in their country of origin and once in their country of residence. Finally, the proposals require member states to report regularly on the application of measures reserving executive elected positions in municipalities for the nationals to allow assessing the necessity of maintaining such measures. We've seen that EU citizenship rights have certainly been put to a test during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has shown very clearly how much EU citizens value their rights of free movement and consular protection, and how sacred our fundamental rights and democratic values are at all times. In 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, a Eurobarometer on EU citizenship and democracy found that more than 8 in 10 respondents thought that free movement of EU citizens within the EU brings overall benefits to the economy of their country. A 2021 survey by Oxford University even found that 74% of Europeans say that the EU is not worth having without free movement. This is why the Commission took decisive action to facilitate cross-border travel during the pandemic, notably with the introduction of the EU Digital COVID Certificate. This is also why, in preparation of a time post-COVID, the Commission is currently working on the reviewed guidance on free movement, the second topic I've been asked to talk about. This new guidance should further facilitate the application of the current free movement acquis across the EU and ensure a more effective and uniform application of the free movement rules across the EU. The Commission is committed to ensuring that the revised guidance will have an added value for citizens and for the national administrations that have to apply the EU rules. The reviewed guidelines will reflect the diversity of families and therefore help all families, including rainbow families, exercise their right to free movement. In addition, based on the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, the guidance will address the application of restrictive measures on free movement due to public health concerns. Additional issues might be addressed, and we are currently identifying the most important and urgent difficulties that citizens and national administrations have faced during recent years with regard to the implementation of the directive. We're especially grateful to many of the actors here today for their studies, their research, and their voices that guide us. The past months and years have given us many challenges. Now it is an important moment to pursue our common goals to the benefits of all citizens. And I look forward to the discussion and your ideas on just what this might look like. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for these very interesting and useful insights. Now we will have Francesca Strumia presenting her vision on the European citizenship of the future. Francesca is a senior lecturer at the School of Law of the University of Sheffield. She's a qualified lawyer both in Italy and in New York, and she worked in various law firms prior to her academic career. She also published many articles on the topic of migration. So I will immediately pass the floor on to her.
Thank you very much, Claire, and good morning, everyone. So the task that has been set to me is to consider the future of European citizenship. And I guess, hearing the very rich presentations that have preceded, we already have many ideas and many leads on the table on where to go from here. Maybe what I'll do is take the bird's eye view, so to say, and shift the focus a little bit from the analysis of the ground and the trends and what we can do to mobilize European citizenship to pondering a few different ideas, a few different visions of European citizenship. And in particular, I want to make two arguments this morning. One is that the challenge we're facing right now is not so much getting to a new future of European citizenship, but is getting back to the future. And the second argument is that the road to get back to the future, so to say, requires a reinventing not so much or not only European citizenship, but also national citizenship. So let me start from the first point then. We need to get back to the future. Some of you may remember a movie in the 80s, Back to the Future, Robert Zemeckis movie. It was the story of a teenager who accidentally time traveled about 30 years back to a time where his parents had not even met. And he was trapped in this past and had to find a way back to the future. And I think we face a similar challenge with European citizenship here. We have time travel back with the pandemic, with the events of the last few years. I don't know whether exactly 30 years back, but somewhere in the region. So crossing borders is suddenly very difficult again. At the very least, it takes a lengthy quarantine declaration, if not proper quarantine. We've been reminded that the state, the national state, is the first port of call to get a vaccination, to get safety of status, to get security. And the ideas of transnational, post-national citizenship that we entertained in the 90s have taken a step back, arguably. In the UK, we have taken the fast train back to the past, I have to say, with Brexit and all of these. And of course, the events of the last month that have precipitated us back into the worst era of European history only added to this dimension of backwards time travel. So the question that we face, I guess, at least as academics, is how do we walk back the way to the future of European citizenship? How do we get back to where we were and we go forward from there and we make sure to stay there? And answering this question requires, first of all, an analytical effort, requires understanding what were the trajectories of European citizenship in the first place. But my argument is not that we have to redo what we have done or just cover ground that has already been covered. The argument is this is also an opportunity to correct the course to some extent, to identify the gaps in our construction of European citizenship and see how we can fill those gaps. So I would say the two key trajectories in the construction of European citizenship have been mostly two, from a conceptual perspective and from a legal perspective, that also reflects, however, in our political vision of European citizenship. One is, so to say, a vertical trajectory. So how to build the link between the people of Europe and the institutions of the European Union. And this was maybe the initial vision in the 80s, fostered also by the European Commission, how to create the People's Europe and how to use the project of European citizenship in this respect. This vertical link is at the heart of the federal thinking on European citizenship in the 90s and maybe the supranational thinking after that. This is one trajectory, very important one. There is a second trajectory, which is at least as important, that I will call the horizontal trajectory. So how European citizenship can be used to build bridges between the different member states, and in particular to create a relation between the citizen and the member states the citizen does not belong to. And this is a crucial question for the movement, right? So the transnational, horizontal, international, borrowing the words of Richard Bellamy, trajectory to European citizenship. So I would say where we were before the pandemic was a combination of these two trajectories. And it wasn't a perfect combination, we all know, but now we're even farther back. And those two trajectories cannot be abandoned, by no means, they are very important. But what I want to argue is that there is an additional one that has been under-regarded and under-considered in the development of European citizenship. And it sounds a lot less fancy than the other two, but it is, in my view, fundamental. And it is precisely the trajectory of national citizenship. So the question to ask in this respect is, how has European citizenship reinvented national citizenship and the relation between each citizen and their own state? So let me use my remaining minutes to sketch what is my vision of how that relation has been reinvented through European citizenship. So first of all, European citizenship with the attached right to free movement has made the relation between each state and their own citizens non-exclusive. So there is an implied understanding in the relation, in the social contract between the state and the citizen, that the citizen does not only belong in one member state. The citizen can have claims, can have rights against other member states, can belong in political spaces that go beyond the boundaries of the individual nation. And in connection to this, European citizenship has challenged the fundamental assumption of the social contract between the state and the social citizenship. This is a contract that has been based in a settled understanding of citizenship. The state owes duties, has a relation to a citizen that is sedentary, is based in the national state, whereas European citizenship has created a relation between the state and the citizen as migrant, its own citizen as a migrant. So what are the implications? There is a set of implications for the state and the role of the state, and there is a set of implications for the citizen and the civic pact. So for the state, this invites us to refocus the attention on not only on host member states of migrant citizens, but of home member states to citizens as migrants. And I would argue in particular that the change that European citizenship has forced or has called for in national citizenship writes a new duty in the social contract between the state and its own citizens to exercise a balancing act between the interest of the sedentary citizens and the interest of the mobile citizens. And of course, we can discuss what this requires in practical terms and in policy terms. But second, also invites us to explore the reflexivity, and this is a thought that I thought very deeply in the context of observing Brexit and the effect of Brexit in the UK. So reflecting on the reflexivity between the duties that the state owes to its own citizens as supranational actors, as potential migrants, as stakeholders in a broader space, and the duties that the state owes to the migrant citizens, the citizens of other member states who knock at its door. There is a reflexivity there. So we always think of the duties of the state to the migrant citizens as duties owed under the treaties, the principle of non-discrimination on the basis of nationality, some heightened notion of hospitality that European citizenship has embodied. And that's a fundamental pillar, but it's not the only one. The state owes duties to migrant citizens, to citizens of other member states, because this is the only way to fulfill the supranational condition of their own citizens, to fulfill that new version of the social contract with the citizen as migrant. In terms of implications for the citizens, I think European citizenship grounds or calls for a new type of civic pact, where the migrant travels as a citizen, not as another. So when he or she gets to a host country, he or she brings along duties as citizens that are owed to the host community, but in part as a surrogate, as a trustee for his role as a citizen in his community of origin. And second, the sedentary citizens, those who do not exercise movement, nonetheless have duties to the incoming migrants, not only out of hospitality, out of the civic translation of non-discrimination on the basis of nationality, but in order to protect their own conditions as citizens of Europe and the supranational dimension that comes with this citizenship. So where does this leave us? Ultimately, I guess the point I want to make is that in order to get back to its future and keep going from there, European citizenship needs to reflect on its own foundation. So the task is similar to what Marty in Back to the Future faced. He had to make sure that his parents would meet so that he would be born and he would have his existence. In the same way, I think European citizenship has to engender a reflection on the change relation between the national state and the citizen, of which ultimately it is an offspring. And I think that reflection can also lead to a number of considerations in terms of that new narrative that the project has been described just before this panel explore, the positive narrative of movement, the shift of narratives. And it is one possible way, certainly not the only way, but one possible way to facilitate the owning of this narrative at national and at European level. I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and it's true that I mean, I like this parallel with the Back to the Future. It's true that we ended up in a situation which were very similar to how we used to stand a few decades ago, and it was interesting to have your insight. Now we are going to have a presentation from Maurizio Ferrera, who's a professor of political sciences at the University of Milan since 2003, and also a president of the Network for the Advancement of Social and Political Studies among universities in Lombardy and in Piedmont. Maurizio is also part of many editorial boards of Italian, but also of foreign journals. And now he's going to provide us his insights on EU social citizenship.
Okay. So the notion of EU social citizenship is more a symbolic label than a legal expression. And because the only right which has some link with social citizenship in the definition of EU citizenship as such is the right to free movement and the right of residence, which, however, T.H. Marshall did consider as a basic social right. But when we think about social citizenship, what we think about is essentially the set of social rights which are produced or underpinned by the EU. And here we have a vast social acquis consisting in hard law, but also in acquis in terms of soft law, that especially in the last 15 years or so has defined a number of common objectives and targets in the social policy and even social rights sphere. I think that enhancing the social dimension of citizenship and therefore the set and range of social rights, which are to some extent anchored to the European Union, is a double imperative. It's a functional imperative to begin with, because capacitating citizens to take full advantage of free movement is of course fully in line with one of the key objectives of the integration process. Some of the speakers have already underlined, but also because integration as such, economic and monetary integration, tends to produce, on top of the many positive externalities, also some negative externalities, especially as far as the labor market is concerned, that call for protections which must be provided by the institutional actor which is responsible for them, namely the European Union itself. But I think it is also a political imperative, because we know that social citizenship has played a very important role in the process of state building at the domestic level, in providing legitimation and support for the regimes, and therefore enhancing this dimension of citizenship at the European Union level could also contribute to enhancing and relaunching support and legitimation for the European Union, which, as we know, suffered a significant decline during the crisis decade. And we know from the experience of the historical federations that the introduction of federal social programs and rights has in fact had this integrative function. We also know, however, that there are institutional constraints to expanding EU social rights, essentially due to the problem of competences. And the EU only has shared competences in the field, in the social dimension. And on top of institutional obstacles, there are also different national preferences and conceptions about social citizenship. And some member states have a clear preference for keeping social rights at the national level. Now, the main instrument that is now at our disposal is the European Pillar of Social Rights. The European Pillar of Social Rights is a very advanced system of principles. Okay, it has not, created rights in the strong sense, but it is a set of 20 principles which are, let's say, programmatic or manifesto rights, as they are sometimes called. But still, it is a very ambitious, probably the most ambitious at the global level, codification of the principles which should found the overall architecture of social citizenship, bringing it in line with the values and the structure of needs of our societies at the moment. Now, the principles need to be implemented, okay? And of course, it is desirable, at least for me, that binding legislation be adopted whenever it is possible, competence-wise, and considering the political differences that there are among the member states. However, we should not think that legal enforceable rights, especially EU legally enforceable rights, are the only instrument for securing social protection to citizens at the grassroots level. We have several experiences of constitutional principles or even legal rights which have remained dead letter because they have not given rise to tangible and concrete outputs. Because what matters ultimately for the citizens, for their life chances, is the possibility of actually enjoying or, quote unquote, consuming the content of their social rights. And this is especially the case for services. Okay, so let's, this is a complicated graph. Let me try to explain it by starting with the top, legal rights. Okay, legal rights establish legal resources for making claims, but from the top down, there is a requirement. There must be the production of concrete outputs. Think of, right, the formal right to healthcare. Of course, you have to have medical services in the area where you reside in order to give a substance and actually access and consume the content of your right. So there is a supply side sequence which is necessary for, let's say, making it possible to actually enjoy your legal rights. legal rights create eligible individuals, individuals that can claim their rights. But again, there's a bottom-up sequence which needs to be put in place, which has to do with information, guidance, claim making the application, and having easy to use access channels. The absence of access channels and procedures, or the obstacles, the bureaucratic obstacles that you may find in accessing the outputs that you want to enjoy, to exercise your legal rights, may not be available or may create impediments. And if we look at the EU, well, the EU can actually intervene or be involved in the actual creation of legal rights through directives and regulations, but it can also play a role, sometimes a very important role, in the other moments of the sequence, by providing funds or standards or setting targets and objectives so that the concrete outputs are actually produced and comply or abide by certain, again, standards of quality, for example. Or you can contribute to the bottom-up sequence by setting up infrastructures that facilitate the access to rights. Not only in the case of free movement, which is already largely the case, but also at the domestic level. We know that, for example, the EU provides funds for funding, financing social initiatives at the local level, and therefore it has the means, and it partly already does so, to actually invest some of these funds for enhancing access opportunities. Or it can provide funds for non-public entities and civil society organizations for engaging in supporting people in their claim making. A lot of, we know that there is a big problem of non-take-up, but non-take-up is very often the result of shortcomings and deficits in the sequence that allows eligible individuals to actually fruition their rights. So on the supply side, the EU can ensure the provision of outputs to a number of instruments I've just mentioned here. Social conditionality, earmarked funds, or orchestrating risk pooling, like it has been done during the pandemic, or getting involved in the demand side and ensuring access to outputs by putting in place access infrastructures, but also dedicated social bodies like equality bodies, which provide instrumental resources which facilitate a correct access to the outputs of rights. Last slide. What I have in mind for constructing EU, the social dimension of EU citizenship, or let's say EU social citizenship, is a marble cake model, in which the EU does not limit itself to being in the areas where it has the competences to create legal resources by means of directives or regulations, but it participates to the whole, production process of the outputs of social rights along the two sequences that I have summarized in the previous slide: supply side and demand side, top down and bottom up. And when legislation is not possible, there is another instrument which has been so far slightly neglected in social science debates, but also at the political level: the instrument of social guarantees, which has already been experimented with in the field of youth unemployment, partly also in the field of competences and skills formation, and now with the child guarantee in the field of those policies that support vulnerable children. Now, a guarantee is not a subjective right, properly speaking, but it is a complex but promising tool for the EU to fully participate in establishing the objectives, the targets, in providing funds, in monitoring standards, and in also participate in first person to providing some of the grassroots resources which can help, for example, in terms of placement or in terms of mobility, again, the beneficiaries of the services provided by social guarantee schemes. And I don't see why the instrument of social guarantee cannot be extended tomorrow to other areas, such as, say, long-term care or work-life balance. Why not? And then, for the longer term or medium term, transform itself into a kind of life chances guarantee, or at least an activity guarantee, whereby the European Union is, involved like in a slice of marble cake in all the aspects which are, elements and important components of social citizenship at the various levels, supranational, national, but also regional and local levels. Okay, thank you. We are working at these ideas in a nice 2020, in a nice 2020 project, which is called The Future of Social Citizenship. It has a website, and those of you who are interested are welcome to access the website. You will find papers, ideas, and of course the text of the project itself. Thank you.
This is very good to know. Thank you very much. Since we're a little bit tight on schedule, I'm going to pass the floor on immediately to Piotr Sadowski. Piotr is the president of Social Platform since 2019, and he's also the Secretary-General of Volonteurope since 2008. And today he's going to present the recommendation on the European Way of Life cluster of the Civil Society Convention on the Future of Europe.
Thank you very much, Claire, Asia, colleagues from ECAS, all of the other speakers for the invitation today. And Claire, as you said, since we're running short of time, we had quite a big cluster that we were working on. So I will probably just focus on the recommendations on the freedom of movement, because I think they would be probably the most appropriate to the kinds of discussions that we've been following throughout today. And the whole cluster recommendations, but also the recommendations of the whole Civil Society Convention will be available very shortly once they have been proofread, and they'll go publicly available on the Civil Society Europe website. So that's just a caveat to say that perhaps my presentation will be shorter, but it does in no way reflect how much work went into all of the recommendations. But just to begin with, this was a cluster that was co-chaired by CEV, the Center for European Volunteering, and Volonteurope, and it was Gabriela Civico and myself who were the co-chairs, and our colleagues were supporting us. But we had over I believe, about over 40, 50 participants in our cluster who focus on rights and values in the EU, on European identity, freedom of movement, civic space, sports, security, the EU's role in the world, migration challenges, but also very much so the opportunities. But what we took as our core business is the European rights and values and the importance of having a very robust and unthreatened civic space in Europe. This was very much a transversal frame and a basis on which we wanted to reflect on the theme or the question of our European life. What is it? What should it be? And finally, how do we get there? And it was also important for us, and I think in the context of today's conversations, that we framed the cluster discussions around a very robust civic space and a healthy democracy in the EU. It was vital for us because it is also closely linked to the notion of EU citizenship that must become fairer, more inclusive, and certainly more crisis resistant. Within the cluster, we also facilitated a culture of really active participation. It's the common good to which it is often referred to. So the ability of civil society and active citizens to come together was very important to bring forward the recommendations that engage European policymakers at all levels. And this was the basis for our recommendations. So as I said, I will focus on this topic. The cluster members deliberated on issues such as, for example, the lack of comprehensive data and information, on the manner in which member states have implemented the Freedom of Movement Directive across Europe, and what impact has this implementation had on the rights of mobile EU citizens. So the number of EU citizens we found that making full use of their freedom of movement, whilst is increasing, is still significantly lower than the overall number of citizens. And there is also an out-of-date assumption within EU institutions that mobile EU citizens simply leave their country of origin and move to another EU country, while intra-EU migration can take various forms and have different durations. And this is a problem because this thinking ignores the fact that many mobile EU citizens, particularly among the younger generation, may be highly mobile, moving to one or more EU countries to study, then to work, then perhaps completing internships, short-term jobs in a number of different countries. The framework under the Free Movement Directive does not provide these young mobile citizens with effective protection of their rights, given its focus on building up rights through periods of continuous residence in just one country. And another aspect that is this thinking really ignores is the fact that mobile EU citizens are often pushed to destitution and left without protection in moments of hardship when in the country other than that of their origin. And we had brilliant examples today of when this happens, for example, in the case of people who find themselves in a situation of homelessness. This was very much evident in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly when the health crisis initially emerged, determining many to return to their country of origin with the hope for better social and health protection. And also, not everyone enjoys the same privileges while exercising their free movement rights, with a focus on mobile citizens finding themselves in particularly vulnerable situations. And here in the cluster, we focused on groups such as women being part of an ethnic minority or persons with disabilities, just to give some examples. And as I said earlier, there were a lot of recommendations that perhaps just to really finalize my short intervention today, we focused on a number of recommendations developed to respond to the challenges encountered by EU mobile citizens in their host countries or negative consequences in their country of origin due to moving to another member state, linking this to COVID-19. And of course, not forgetting what is happening as well now with the war in Ukraine crisis. But I must also make a preamble that obviously our recommendations were written before the breakout of the Russian military invasion. So in this context, our members of the cluster said that the EU should restore in full and safeguard freedom of movement in the European Union by extending a fully functioning Schengen area to all EU member states, which will also include Bulgaria, Romania, Ireland, and Croatia, which are now left behind. Ensuring equal access to all rights it entails of all mobile Europeans, including those in vulnerable and precarious situations, and making the fundamental principle of freedom of movement in the EU much more resilient to all future unforeseen shocks by strengthening EU competences in relevant areas such as health. So I'll finish on that, Claire, because as I say, I could go on and on and on, and there were 7 other parts of our cluster, but I think for the focus of our conversations today, I'll just leave it at that. And as soon as the all cluster recommendations are available, I'm sure ECAS was part of this process and work as well. We can then share it with all the participants. So thank you.